About 6 months ago, I made a very comprehensive video about the HDR streaming issue, or bug, or problem, or whatever you want to call it, about the PlayStation Portal. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should probably go watch that, but I'll also give you a recap here, or you can skip ahead to the new solution if you're already up to speed. Basically, the PlayStation Portal has an LCD screen that doesn't support HDR, but depending on your PS5 and TV settings, the PS5 will still stream an HDR video signal to your Portal, which results in a very blown out video signal. The issue has something to do with HDMI CEC or HDMI link, but in my case the problem still occurs quite often even with that feature disabled on my PS5. Now you'd think that this would be an easy software fix on Sony's end, but here we are almost a year since the Portal's launch with the same issue still being brought up quite regularly online. The next easiest solution you'd assume is to just turn off HDR settings when you're using the Portal. But in a genius move, Sony's actually disabled access to the screen and display settings of the PS5 while you're connected to it with Remote Play. I even demonstrated that if you initially connect your Portal to your PS5 while it's on that settings menu, you can actually toggle HDR on and off without an issue until you back out of that menu. This limitation results in many users resorting to unplugging their PS5 when using Remote Play. But that's a very stupid solution because it defeats the entire concept and purpose of the Portal being a ready-to-go Remote Play accessory. Just to check my sanity, I did another comparison of the Portal with HDR specifically turned on and off. Here are my HDR settings. You can see HDR is on, and I usually try to leave HDR set to on when supported, but I find that it actually switches back to HDR always on a lot of the time when I'm messing around with this sort of stuff. But in either case, it doesn't seem to work when I'm connecting with my Portal. In my last video, I did some very surface level tests using gameplay footage. So this time I redid the same tests, but I also got some proper HDR test footage to specifically get to the bottom of what the Portal is receiving. These clips are from the Mechanic HDR10 calibration and test patterns package, I guess, which I had to re-encode from MP4 to WebM VP9 HDR footage so that the PS5 could actually play it in HDR from a USB stick. This first test screen shows HDR10 tone mapping from about 240 nits to 1000 nits in a few different colors. And on the Portal screen, you can already see that almost all of this spectrum of color and brightness is already out of the range of the Portal display. And here it is compared to having HDR disabled. So I have some other options. So we get a little bit more specificity about where the signal is completely washing out in this case. Here's the first of a set of very gradual grayscale steps. I think this one goes from 0 nits to about 5.5 nits, so this is very low. Obviously this will all show up on the Portal screen, so let's look at the next one. This one goes from 6.7 nits to about 120 nits. Also shows up pretty well on this screen. And this is where we can see it start to struggle. So this pattern goes from 135 nits to about 1500 nits. And when HDR is enabled on the PS5, you can see that the Portal pretty much goes to pure white and you can't really see the gradient anymore at around 250 nits. And then when HDR is disabled, you can still only see up to about 350 nits. The most surprising part is how having HDR turned off properly still leaves a lot of washed out highlights. And having HDR on versus off is only about a 100 nits difference. Everything above 350 nits is still completely washed out when HDR is turned off. So even the SDR conversion that the PS5 and Remote Play software is doing in this case is still pretty poor. And this next part is mostly a retread of what I showed in my original video with some gameplay examples, but I wanted to redo these just to see if the issue is still the same as it was. Feel free to skip ahead to the solution. Here's what HDR gameplay is supposed to look like recorded from the PS5 compared to what it looks like on the Portal. Take note of the sun in this case. And here's some more examples to demonstrate the issue. This is a screenshot from Death Stranding. Again, take note of how much detail is lost in the distance on the Portal display compared to what's visible on the PS5 recording. And then here's what it's supposed to look like on the Portal when HDR is turned off. And here's a screenshot from Mafia 2, and this is actually a PS4 game that supports HDR. And you can see just how much detail I'm losing in the sky in this specific screenshot. In particular, you can barely even see the streetlights that are not too far along this highway. The Mafia and Death Stranding examples in particular show how even when HDR is properly off, we are still not getting a lot of visibility in the upper highlights. So while they are quite an improvement and they do make it possible to see into the immediate gameplay relevant distance, a lot of the finer details of the horizon and skyline are still washed out at best. Next, here's a clip from Spider-Man 2 that I used in my original video where the sky is basically completely white and you lose all the details of the clouds. And this is an issue that's just constantly happening during gameplay as you're swinging around the city during the daytime. And again, here's what it looks like with the correct SDR video signal on the portal. The last example I'll show you is another part of Ghost of Tsushima, so you can see on the map screen. There's so much detail lost in the highlights. Many of the unexplored areas and labels of the map become unreadable when they get towards the middle of the display. Then this little island over here is another great example because it all but disappears along with the map crosshairs when HDR is on. Hopefully those are some good examples of what this issue is and why it's so bothersome for some players in games that support HDR. Now let's move on to this new magic solution. After all this time, Reddit user Dioscoro finally found a really great solution that's basically as close to a quick HDR toggle as we will probably get without the real thing. So here's how you can quick toggle HDR on your PlayStation Portal. Hit the PlayStation button to open your control center, hit the options button to open the edit menu, and you're gonna want to add the accessibility menu to your control center. In the accessibility menu, you're gonna wanna check off invert colors at the top here. Now on your PS5, this is gonna obviously invert the colors of the screen, but on your Portal, it'll just turn off HDR as far as I can tell. So now if we go back to our examples, you can see all of the things that I highlighted before that weren't visible when HDR was on. Now you can see everything. Here's that little island again. You can see it very clearly, and you can also see the crosshairs. And here's the same test patterns with inversion turned on, which is identical to having HDR turned off as far as I can tell, giving you visibility of these steps up to about 350 nits. So I can comfortably confirm that the invert toggle is equivalent to fully disabling HDR or unplugging your PS5 HDMI cable for all intents and purposes in this case. And just for thoroughness, here's the rest of the examples again when the color inversion is enabled compared to the same screens when HDR was on. Hopefully this helps you out if you were noticing this problem and it was really bothering you. And if you didn't notice the problem and think I complain too much, even more power to you. I just hope you remember that it is possible to enjoy a product while also being able to criticize it and want it to improve. Independent developers of other third-party PlayStation Remote Play apps don't have this HDR problem, so I really don't think it's too big of an ask for the thousands of software developers at Sony to be able to fix something like this. But I digress. Thanks for watching. If you've watched through this whole thing, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And let me know down below if you'd be interested in a video about maybe the video stutter or audio delay issues with the PlayStation Portal, if that's something you'd like me to look more into in depth. But otherwise, bye-bye.